Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Becoming Us, a program brought to you by BetterHelp, which is a provider of virtual therapy sessions. I'm Bambi Francisco Roizen, and with me again is Alyssa Morrison. She is the BetterHelp therapist who will be facilitating our discussion today. Well, what is Becoming Us? Many of you know it is a 5-month program focused on who we're becoming in this new normal. And this month it's about relationships. How do we create new relationships and how do we improve our existing relationships? Well, over the weekend I watched this movie again called Let There Be Dragons, and it's about two men who grow up as friends during the Spanish Civil War, but they live very dichotomous lives. So one man, Manolo Torres, is very wealthy, and the other, Jose Maria, is very poor. But Manolo Torres, despite his wealth, he harbors and struggles with a lot of jealousy. So he's always desiring what other people have, despite the fact that he has so much already. And Jose Maria, by contrast, is at peace. And there's one segment in the movie where Jose Maria is with his friends, and his friends are angered by the war. They're outraged by the politics, and Jose Maria tries to calm them down, and he says, friends, before you rush out, before you try to change the world, first think about changing yourself. So events do change us and our relationships. So the question for us is, how are they changing us, and how are they changing our relationships? Stop that too early there. So, well, in this new normal, the very last slide was in this new normal, who do we become?
I decided to 1v1 my TikTok
Sorry about that. As you can tell, my 8-year-old watches my YouTube channel. And that was his video there. Anyway, the last slide that you missed was in this new normal, who do we become? And for this month is who do we become in relationship to one another? So I mentioned that movie, Let There Be Dragons, and one of the characters, Manolo Torres, he lives a very bitter life, and he's full of bitterness, jealousy, resentment, and his son internalizes this anger, and he can't forgive his dad for the unrest he has in his heart. But he finally does when Manolo is on his deathbed, and he forgives his dad. And he realizes once he does that, it wasn't that he was releasing his dad of his debt that he thought his dad owed to him. He was actually freeing himself of this burden of carrying this anger around with him in his entire life. And I think because we're talking about relationships today, we can think about who is it in our life that we need to forgive, whether it's our spouse, a partner, a boss, a coworker, a family member, a friend, or a neighbor. And hopefully that's something that we can discuss throughout this discussion today, but we'll be covering a lot of topics. And Alyssa has great slides and great topics for us to talk about with regards to relationships. So I'm going to bring her in. Alyssa is one of the thousands of therapists that work at BetterHelp, and BetterHelp is a great resource. If you haven't tried it, they are offering everybody here right now that's gathering, they're offering you a free trial. So after this session, we'll be sending out an email with a link so you can try out BetterHelp. It's very convenient. Obviously, you can be in your home, you can have asynchronous conversations, and it is relatively affordable relative to other sources out there. So you should give it a shot. Anyway, I want to bring in Alyssa, and she's going to take it from here.
Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you to Bambi and Vader for having me again. I had a really good time 2 weeks ago, so I'm thrilled to be back. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm in New Jersey, just outside of New York City. It matters if you've ever lived in New York City, just being outside matters. So welcome. We're going to do a bunch of different slides, well, 4 different slides than we did last time, but I'm happy to talk about anything that is helpful to you all, as much as you all want to ask questions even during my slide deck. I'm happy to answer anything. I want this to feel as comfortable and easygoing as possible. So give me 1 second. Okay, So when we think about relationships, and let me just move this really quick, Bambi and I were really thinking about these 4 new topics. And one thing that really rose to the top of the discussion was around resilience for leaders. It was brought up last group, and there were a lot of really innovative ideas about how to engage your employees and coworkers. And then we also kind of talked about the fatigue that happens really naturally, because we have in varying levels been doing this for 5 months, and there's not really a clear end in sight. And it can be really hard to continue with that same level of endurance. So a couple ideas that I have for this is really taking an opportunity to normalize that exhaustion and fatigue is valid and is real. And I think that if we as leaders of a team or as models in a community or whatever group structure there is, if we can really model that it is normal to have differing levels of energy or optimism even at any given time, but still be, continuing to foster that hope and optimism that we would want to have and we would want our team to have, that usually can create a much richer support network and an opportunity to have discussions about how can we cope and how can we move forward. One way that we can do that is challenging that absolute thinking. So sometimes people call it black and white thinking, but really it's that whenever we get into that always or never mindset, because very rarely are things really falling into those two camps. So if we can really look for ways that we can challenge that, even if we don't feel like it's 100% accurate, just that practice of challenging it really disrupts some of those negative thought patterns that are really easy to fall into. So Dr. Martin Seligman has, with the University of Pennsylvania, he has this really exciting model of how you can obtain happiness. And he's one of the co-founders of positive psychology. And so the model, and I'm going to send a PDF in the chat when we're done, that one of the positive psychology kind of groups has created that's really helpful about this. He talks about this model called PERMA. And so it's that positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishments. And what he suggests is if we can focus on these, ideally all of them, but at least a few of them, that's how we can really start to maximize and increase our levels of happiness. And so the ways that we do that is, so for positive emotion is really working to adopt that positive perspective when we can. And so it doesn't mean that we're Pollyanna or we deny the frustration or, you know, sometimes the absolute like horror around us, right? If going off Bambi's video, it wouldn't be helpful to like 9/11 survivors, especially in the moment, to say, no, this is fine. It's absolutely not fine. But looking for, okay, where can I cultivate some gratitude? Where can I look for ways that I do feel safe and start to build off that? Engagement is finding the things that make you happy or help you feel at peace. A really big thing about this is we tend to sometimes let those intense emotions color our entire experience. So if we can really try to adopt a more mindful state, we start to notice that feelings are usually waves. And even if we are experiencing intense grief or intense anxiety, we may have that throughout the duration of the day, but the varying levels of intensity are going to be important for us to notice, because again, it starts to cultivate that hope and give us some optimism. So relationships are focusing on your relationships, specifically the ones that are working, but also the ones that could use a little bit of tender loving care, really allowing yourself to set that as a priority. Meaning is searching for meaning and leading a life of purpose. So that can be many different things. It could be found through work, through family, through other relationships, community service, whatever that means for you. And finally, accomplishments is not only striving for accomplishments, like future ones, but also savoring the ones that we have. Sometimes this can be really difficult for people who sometimes struggle with imposter syndrome or think they kind of have lucked into things. But one thing that we know is really helpful with imposter syndrome and with this accomplishment portion of PERMA is to really even sometimes make a list as you go of like the good things that you have, like maybe the good feedback you've gotten, the awards, and so that you're really looking at, okay, this isn't a culmination of my good work. It's not just me trying to remember things in the past. Okay, so Bambi brought up this really interesting idea of social media and the use of emoticons. And so I wanted to kind of change this up a little bit to talk about what do we think? Like, do we feel like those emoticons, whether they're emojis or kind of those reactions that we could do on Facebook specifically, do we feel like they're maybe distancing us from our real life relationships? Like, is it easier to even potentially feel like ingenuine when we are reacting in that way? So I'd love to hear what you all think about that. I'm putting you guys on the spot a little bit. real.
Well, I think emoticons reduce us to, we have a wide range of complex, multifaceted emotions. So obviously emoticons could never begin to capture all of that. So, you know, and I'm sorry, I think I somehow lost track of what your original question was. But my point in this is that I think we definitely lose some, some of the value of in-person, when we reduce our emotions to what the emoticons offer.
Thank you. I absolutely can appreciate your point that yes, we have far more complex emotional reactions than the, I think, maybe 6 options that we're given.
And I'm sorry, can you repeat your question again? I want to make sure I answered it.
Yeah, so if emoticons are potentially distancing us from our real life relationships.
I think they can be kind of gratuitous. I remember when I didn't really get on Facebook. I mean, I was on for a long time, but I really didn't get on until about 3 or 4 years ago. And I remember my husband saying, "You're supposed to like what people say." And so he's like, "Give me your phone." And he started liking stuff and I said, "Why?" He's like, just to make them feel good. And I thought, well, that doesn't seem honest. And I don't even know what I'm liking. And so, but I find myself doing that now too. So I do think that there is some of this superficial engagement that's going on. I even see some people writing down text without images and saying, if you read this post, that means you actually care, or something like that. So I do think that on one hand, it's brought me close to some people I haven't seen in a while, but on the other hand, I can't tell if it's more negative or positive. It feels a little bit more negative these days, just given the environment.
Well, I think that I think the world is been built on positive psychology, and while there's some greatness to that, I think that we grow through discomfort and from feedback to the world that doesn't necessarily need to be critical, but it helps us evolve and guide. And I think that it's like working a muscle out. I think we're adverse to negative feedback, or feedback that doesn't make it feel like every moment we do something or every part of our life isn't, getting the results it wants. And I think it keeps us in a locked state, no different than, someone that's addicted to something that has to happen for them, right? And I don't know, and I would say I'd fall into the trap where I posted something and boy, it's really important to me because of this picture I took of my son that people liked. And it's like, how do I even get into that mentality? What does it really matter? So I would say that overdoing it, which might be where we are, isn't good in the long run. I think for all of us, particularly for developing children, for sure, we need to, I think, balance the constructiveness of real thoughtful and devoted feedback, but may not be exactly what they want to hear at the moment.
Thank you for sharing that. Your point about instant gratification, I think, is a really, really sound one and important. And I think it's great if we can be reflective in that way of, like, am I posting this because I want to share the photo, or am I looking for some kind of like feedback or feeling, which would be a really normal, natural, I think, pretty universal experience. But I agree with you. If we can check in on that, I think that would potentially open us to having different conversations, or even kind of receiving different feedback. I don't want to cut anyone off though. If anyone else has anything to say, I've appreciated you all.
Sure.
Who is that?
Don. So funny, being married for a little bit right now, my wife tells me, at least early on, she said, "What exactly do you mean? What exactly do you mean?" And when I get emotional as a man, it's hard for me to actually communicate. So these emotion, I don't even know what they, I can't even say the word, emotions, emocons, whatever those things are, emoticons. I mean, to click a button, it's kind of Neanderthalish to me. It's like, okay, yeah, it takes away the work I have to do to really get in touch with my emotions, to be able to verbalize them. And I think for younger generations, I have a 6-year-old grandson who lives with me. For him to be able to be on the phone and to do that, it takes away his ability, or I shouldn't say it takes away his ability, it could retard his growth of emotions because he doesn't have to express and work on expressing, well, why are you reacting this way? And he's used to responding with his emotions with a little click. And so I think, like everything in life, there's good and there's bad. I think we have to be able to self-assess and recognize and think, okay, for me, I've got to be a better communicator when I'm emotional, to have them under control. So I think they're fine. It doesn't one way or another. I think it's great for marketing for business people. You know, the 2 questions, emocon, whatever these things are, you happy, need and then awesome article. Those are, they're fine. But I think that overall, I think for me, it doesn't quite help me express my emotions. And I think it might be an easy way out for a lot of people too.
I can see your point, and I really appreciate you kind of bringing in a perspective of such a young child, because it is a very different experience than for us as adults. Really interestingly, I did some research about this after Bambi raised the question, and mostly kind of the articles, and none of them are peer reviewed or from like JAMA or anything like that, but they were kind of these think pieces where they were backing it up, still with some theory. And a lot of it was talking about, at least in 2017 when they were written, that they were saying it as a really positive thing. But their points were much more about emojis and how, if, for instance, your wife is communicating, you can do whatever you want, that might be a bit ambiguous in a text, but if she attaches the like red angry face with like the bleeped out words, you have a pretty good idea that it is not actually just do whatever you want. Or if she gives a thumbs up, that gives or a heart, that's a very different kind of intent behind those words. So I can absolutely see that point, but I think all of you are raising such rich points about kind of those. You can even do them in iMessage where you hold it down and you kind of choose. And yes, sometimes when you're rushed, giving a thumbs up is great. But I can really appreciate your points that, yeah, it's really helpful if we are able to like really connect with other people with, you know, articulating our genuine thoughts versus relying necessarily on a reaction. Okay, so I don't see any, I'm going to keep going, but we can always come back.
Tammy has raised her hand here.
Oh, somebody has? Oh, I just
yeah.
didn't see it. Yes, please. I'm coming back. Okay, yes, please, share.
No, my name is Tammy, and I think the biggest thing with emoticons is just not finding our self-worth in them. I think that's the biggest trap with social media in general, is especially with the younger generation, if they're not getting as many likes, if they're not getting as many positive emoticons, then they associate their self-worth with that, and that could be a dangerous trap, not just for young people, but I think just all of us in general.
Absolutely. I'm so sorry I didn't see your hand. I'm so glad that you shared that. No, I think that's a really important part of, yes, it is really tempting to start to base our self-worth on that, because it's such a public persona then that we're sharing. It's like, oh, if I'm going to share this picture of a major life event and it only gets a few likes compared to my greater like social circle that's getting many more likes, what does that say about people's acceptance of me? And there's so many factors and variables, right? That's why influencers have it like down to a science of like the good times to post versus the like less successful times to post. So I think that's a great point. Thank you.
I think that's I love that point, Tammy. And I think for the kids, or even for adults, it's a great humbling moment, right? It's a great time to learn about or relearn humility and ask ourselves, why are we posting? Like Tom said, why are we posting it? Because we just want to post it to keep it as a memory, or we post it because we want people to acknowledge what we've done in our lives. And so that's a good thing for the kids to just say, well, why did you post it? And maybe we should be posting for other reasons besides acknowledgement. Because that's dangerous if your self-worth is based on the number of likes you get on social media. That's definitely a recipe for volatility, a volatile character. So I just brought you up, Tom, if you're there.
Oh, yeah, yeah. No, I'm here. Are you talking to Tommy, or is there another Tom?
No, Tom Patterson, because Tammy had brought up this idea of self-worth and emoticons, and I was saying that's a good way to just check your humility by asking, why are you posting anyway? And it's good for the kids, particularly because they're the ones that are growing up in this environment of how do they create their own self-worth.
Yeah, you know what's funny, Bambi, is Frances Fry, who's a Harvard professor. She just wrote a new book, and it's doing amazing. And you know, we all love 2x2s, right, with an access here. And it was just talking about the analogy is parenting, but it's also being a good leader at work. And effectively, it's low standards, high standards, low devotion, high devotion, right? And it is an incredible difference when, you know, we all have to have high devotion to our children, right? We would expect that. And, you know, in our work, in our relationships, we'd expect some level of high devotion. But the impact of having low standards, which would mean that, and I hate to use this analogy, everything is positive, you've done everything well, that effectively there's no gradient. So there isn't, you know, better versus worse or more constructive versus less. It literally like has, I can't remember what the number was, an impact on the trajectory of an individual. And this was in the work context, an incredible difference in what the trajectory that can happen to someone if the standards are very high and there is that high devotion, because we just don't see ourselves. There's no awareness to what's great, what's bad. There's no delineation anymore. And it takes away the opportunity to grow. So I would say that we're doing ourselves great favor to getting direct feedback. What didn't you like about that post? Or am I overdoing it? Anyway, I think we need a gradient.
Great. How do you suggest, I don't know, Alyssa, I was just curious, how do we have a gradient? Do you have a solution?
I mean, I think I love the idea of a gradient. I think there would have to be a lot of trust in that relationship to have that vulnerability to really receive that information, which ideally, if you're looking for that validation from someone, you would have that type of relationship. But I think we can all think of many times on social media where it is kind of that public for show experience more than it is that intimate, like one-on-one. But I think that speaks to Tom's point more of, hey, like instead of it being this like public show, let's have it more one-on-one so that we can, if there's validation that we need, like maybe it can be more meaningful versus if we do need some tweaks. But yeah, I think I can imagine a lot of people would feel very vulnerable getting that feedback.
Yeah, no, I think it's probably not the group, but I've had to tell, and I've had friends, well, not really tell me, but I probably have told some people they're overdoing it on expressing their life and how great their life is on the restaurants they go to and X, and I'm not sure that's you and that's where you want to go. And so they kind of solicited, and I allowed that to happen. I just took the boldness to kind of have that conversation with them. So I just double clicking onto the trust needs to be there from small curated group to be able to give that to you. And that does take time. Even right now, like we're all just talking. So I'm taking some risk in what I'm sharing possibly, because I don't know yet whether you trust me or I trust you. I'm just assuming that now. I think it's finding that curated set in your life related to, I think, reflecting on this world that we're living in a lot, which is this mobile world of emoticons, as Bambi says. So what pulls us back from that's endless. I remember your last one, Bambi, I watched the last great session that was Becoming Us, and I can't remember the woman, but she said, how does it make me feel when someone gives me a negative comment into something I post when I posted it out of whatever. I can't remember her name, but I think she's one of the speakers here. And like, if you throw it out into the wild, like, it's going to happen. You are going to get negative for potentially no reason whatsoever. And you have to realize that, like, that can't be a validation moment for you. It's just the standard distribution curve of what's going to happen to you that day.
I think you were talking about Feli, because she was having, I think I even recall her having a post. I think she mentioned she had a post, and I think she didn't even know her friends until they all started reacting to her post. So I think that's an interesting thing that for me, that I have experiences now, really knowing what my friends think. And knowing where we might differ. And obviously this is not family photos. People aren't going to post anything terrible, make any terrible comments around family photos, but they do if you make a comment about anything, even schools or the current environment. So that's been an interesting thing. You actually do know, who sort of, where they're thinking, what their worldviews are, actually. I mean, that's what it comes down to, what they believe in. And I put on Twitter that I'm here really to observe people, humanity, because that's really what I'm there for. I shouldn't even be on there. I mean, it's just, it's full of vitriol, as everybody knows, but I look at it because I just want to study people. So that's the only reason. And every once in a while I have to be like, oh, I'm gonna go post something on Twitter, and I have to hold myself back. Like, no, just try not to get too involved.
Well, if I could say something, Bambi, we just live in such a different world where we can't really say how we feel or think anymore. And I just learned to, I was listening to the last podcast group session that you guys had, and just, what was it? The wise exercising wisdom. What was it?
The wise mind?
Yes, the wise mind. So the wise mind is telling me, because these days everybody has an opinion, right? So if you really want to know my opinion, then maybe we'll start like a small group session on social media, and then collectively, respectively share each other's opinions. But just on the main post, like, I've learned to have the wise mind and stay off of that, because my goal as a person, just like Bambi, is to be the observer. Mine is to just empower and encourage people and just to help people. So my mind is thinking, okay, is what I'm going to say going to be encouraging? Is it going to be inspirational? Is it going to affect people positively, or is it going to cause division? And I don't want that. I want unity. So
that is a beautiful application of wise mind. I really appreciate that. I haven't heard that one. It makes complete sense. So I'm definitely going to steal that for the next time I'm talking about it. One thing that Tom's points also made me think of is how much richer our relationship can become if you are able to like share that feedback with such love and admiration of the person, of, hey, like, I really respect who you are. And I think the projection that you're giving it doesn't align with what you want. And I think often to have like a really the emotional intimacy that we want in relationships, we do have to have some of those difficult conversations. Not necessarily on the main post on Facebook. Like, I can certainly appreciate that, but those like one-on-one conversations, I think there's a lot of opportunity for that relationship to deepen. So that's awesome.
Yeah, I think about, Tammy, I think about this, the Proverbs, which is idle hands are the devil's workshop, but idle lips are his mouthpiece. And so I always think of that, if you don't have anything constructive to say, then you probably don't need to say it at all. And I think sometimes people have to chime in because, let's just say maybe it's an election year and people have to chime in and show that there's momentum around this perspective. And I think we just have to hold ourselves back, and make constructive comments versus comments that are just going to antagonize, if they might. And I just had a situation with something that somebody had posted, and I just thought, that seems wrong to me, but I'm going to hold myself back because I want to. I don't need to, gain any momentum with other people and try to be an activist here. I just thought, I'm gonna step back from this one. So
Yeah, many of you are not aware, but I have 6 children, and so I'm constantly having to remind them, speak words of edification instead of tearing each other down. And I think it's a good reminder for all of us. Goes back to our old mom, the mom saying of if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. But I think it's important during this time to just really build each other up instead of tearing each other down. So I like that, Bambi. Thank you.
I'd like to piggyback, excuse me. I'd like to piggyback on you, Bambi, with a scripture. Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament, he said to the church in Rome, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everybody. And I think that it's a great mantra that if everybody just applied this one biblical principle to their life, everybody wants to live most people want to live peaceful lives, want to get along. And if it depends on us, well, that means we have to look inwardly. What is it that I need to hold back or have the humility to not to argue, or the self-control not to respond or react? So I think I appreciate you bringing that point up. And it's the way we do those things is by working on self and not looking at the other person to help us necessarily do that. We're actually made to control ourselves. If we have going back to the PERMA, which is our purpose, one of the things in there. So just my thoughts on that. Thanks for sharing that, Bambi. And Tammy, God bless you, 6 children. Oh my gosh.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate this conversation. As I was preparing this, my mind was going in so many different ways. And so I really appreciate that you all engaged with us with this, because I figured if my mind was going in 5-6 ways, that there would be even more diversity of thought. And I think that's so rich. So yes, definitely lots of considerations of ways that we can show that kindness and tolerance privately, publicly, interpersonally. So I really appreciate that. So let's talk about dating and loneliness. I want to give it up for Christian in July's groups. I know he covered loneliness and did a beautiful job with that. But it definitely, dating and loneliness can absolutely interweave. And as I'm sure if you look at all of Bambi's group topics, they all tend to kind of interweave a bit anyway, because nothing in life is completely sectioned off. But so one of the things when we were talking about this is, Bambi asked, well, what are you doing with your clients that are facing this? And I had to be very honest that we are in this really difficult space of none of us have navigated anything like this before. So it's not like Esther Perel, I don't know if you all are familiar with her, but she has wonderful TED Talks. She has podcasts, books. She's a couples therapist in New York City and just has wonderful advice and like rich insight. So she's done some things about what it's like for people who are dating during this pandemic. But we're not 3 years out where there's all this like great evidence-based practice and we've done this intervention a lot and we know it works. So one of the things that I think that most of us, if not all of us as clinicians, are really left with is validating. Again, going back to that resiliency idea of it is difficult and it is uncharted. And so it's not that if someone is feeling lonely or feeling isolated or separated, it's not a personal failing. It's not that someone's doing it wrong. It's that this is a really strange, trying not to use the word unprecedented, time where it's not like we can just draw from everything in our history, or we can't ask a friend or like a mentor, what would you do in this situation? So what can we do with that then is certainly there are dating apps and all of that, but I'm more interested in like, how can I support people to manage those feelings? And so mindfulness is definitely the best intervention I can offer people. There are several apps, so like Calm, Headspace, multiple apps that are having at least some free content, if not extended free trials, that are really coaching people through like, what is mindfulness practice if they're beginners, to more elevated exercises or meditation guides for people that have more experience. So that's something I've really been encouraging people. And also identifying like where the connection is. Like where do people feel connected, and where in that same idea of waves of emotion, that in waves of experience, where let's look for the times that it's less intense and the distress is decreasing. What about that could we potentially replicate? Or is it that we are feeling connected in a meeting because we're seeing other people? Well, could we maybe form more opportunities for video calls? I don't think that's where most of us are at this point after many Zoom meetings. Some hopefully really exciting like this, and some a little bit less. But certainly there's that opportunity. Or do we feel more connected when we're outside? Are there times that we can really maximize that? And then finally, I wanted to talk about this navigating social distancing etiquette, because I think this is something that comes up a lot when we think about the pandemic. I'm also going to put this article link, I'm going to put this in the chat as well. I know no one wants to write this down if they're interested, so that will be to you in just a second. So I do a relationship group for BetterHelp. For anyone who is a subscriber, they can join groups somewhat like this, a little bit different content. And that's one thing that comes up a lot is how can I navigate this with my roommate, a family member, romantic partner, if we're feeling different, like if we have different levels of tolerance for risk during the pandemic, if we have different views about how serious this is. And so these are some suggestions I have of ways that we can really put ourselves in as much of like a firm, grounded standing for ourselves to then be as effective as possible in communicating and maintaining those positive relationships. So the first is to determine and express our boundaries. I think there is a lot of ways that we can do that, right? So I read, I read this article that had this really great suggestion of really looking for the ways that we can control the situation. So if somebody is if I'm someone who feels very conservative with my risk tolerance, and I really want everyone to wear masks and stay 6 feet apart and be diligent in hand washing. If someone comes close to me and like line at the grocery store, or maybe isn't wearing their mask in the like covering the nose and mouth, then I would have the opportunity to turn my back to them. And even though that, if it's a stranger, even though I might not be successful in asking them to fully cover, I will be successful in turning my back and putting that distance between us. So it's not like a perfect solution, but it definitely gives us the sense of control. But when we're having those discussions with people that we're able to, I think it's important to acknowledge the right to disagree, that we don't have to see things exactly the same way in order to acknowledge each other's feelings, our own feelings, and really respect each other's boundaries. Definitely, we have to be creative, which we all know at this point, in how these interactions take place to continue the relationship. So if somebody is I know that there are some of my friends in New York City feel so strongly that if people are going to enter their space, they have to follow the same protocol that they are because it's their home. And I think that's something that really has to be discussed beforehand and not assumed, and also be willing to accept maybe that person who doesn't want to do all of that, maybe that's not the place for you all to meet. Maybe the best place is the park or on a walk or something like that. And finally, acknowledging that information and comfort levels are going to continue to evolve. Like the more information we get, the more we will know. I know the New York Times sent out their email blast, I think it was Monday, I might be wrong, but with this really encouraging information that herd immunity was originally thought to be 70%, but now they're thinking maybe 50 to 60%. And so some of those areas that were really hit hard might not have a second wave. And of course, we don't know, right? Like that's just a thought, but I think that's a really great example of how that's new information. And if that is true, comfort levels will continue to evolve. But yeah, so thank you so much for letting me share this. I would love to hear what you all think. And yeah, just let me know what's going on.
Well, I really appreciated what you had to say, because I think that's something I've been grappling with in all my different social circles. I'm single, and so I want to be plugged into multiple social circles, and everyone has different levels of tolerance. And so I've learned it's very important to respect where everyone's at. And some people are too loosey-goosey for my taste, and I've found it a little off-putting at times. And then I've realized, well, no, I've got to respect where everyone's at. And also, I've been trying to step out more and express sort of my boundaries. So I think that's very important for me to do, and just acknowledge, even, if it seems a little too much to others, that's where I'm at. And a little just about me personally, I had the symptoms. I was never diagnosed in March and April, and it was, pretty intense. And so I have a lot of fear for my loved ones too. I don't want them to catch it. So we're all just sort of, in different places with what we're grappling with. And, but I feel very hopeful by some of the recent news, like what you mentioned, Alyssa.
Thank you for sharing that. That's such a good point about it's so different based on like our own experiences. Like my family is from Greenville, South Carolina, and certainly COVID is down south now, but for a long time, I would talk to my mom about like my dad's level of risk tolerance. And she would just remind me, like, you were teaching, I teach at Fordham. You were teaching in the city, like you saw what COVID looks like. We have not seen it. Like you can't expect for him to hold that same perspective. And I was like, I should really know that, right? I've been talking to my clients about that. So I really appreciate that point.
Thank you.
Tammy, I would love to hear what you were thinking.
Okay. So I liked what Anne Marie had to say, which is just respecting people's boundaries. So I'm actually a nurse, and I've worked with a lot of COVID patients and been exposed. And I also have systemic lupus, so I'm autoimmune compromised, and I have 6 children, as I said. So just didn't want them to be exposed. So there was a lot of uncertainty, especially in the beginning of the pandemic. And I think it's just very important to know and respect what other people are feeling, and just being sensitive to that, because there are friends. I actually homeschool the kids as well before everyone was forced to homeschool the kids, and we would have families coming over every week for art class or music or whatever it is. And now we've lost a few families. We haven't even seen them in months, since March. And we had to respect that and just know that they're not comfortable coming over, or maybe some are comfortable, but they have to wear masks, or, there's certain boundaries that they have. And I think it's just super important to just be respectful with how everyone's feeling, and just not make fun of other people because they have different fear factors. And They come from different backgrounds, and maybe they see grandma all the time, and grandma's super old and sick, and they don't want her to get sick. So I think that's key. But I did want to mention about, did want to talk about loneliness a little bit. Obviously, I'm not too lonely. I've got 6 kids. but, but we do know a lot of people who are suffering with loneliness. And I think it's important, especially if you aren't the one who's lonely, to just look for opportunities. One of my daughters had mentioned, Mom, what about this 90-year-old guy that goes to our church, which we haven't seen in a long time. And so I reached out to him and trying to feel out his comfort level, if he even wants to meet with a family, especially a nurse, you know. And he actually did. He was very lonely, and he wanted a visitor. And so he actually agreed to meet at Applebee's, which was really funny. So we treated him to Applebee's, and me and the 6 kids, we just sat around with this old guy, and he talked about the Korean War and whatever else he wanted to talk about in the glory days. And it just really made his day, his week, his month. And I think that's important. I think it's important just to reach out to those who are struggling and see what they're comfortable with and how you can help them out.
Absolutely. I think at least I have noticed that like a lot of people think about specifically older adults like in their 90s when there are kind of environmental situations, right? Like when we lost power for a few days and there is an older adult on our street and everybody was like, let me bring you food, let me do this. And I actually do know this particular gentleman has a very close friend next door. So he's having a lot, probably too much interaction. I'm teasing. But I don't know that we all thought about him in that same way as when like the power was out and like, oh, does he have water? Does he have like a way to contact people if he needs it? And so I think that's such a good point of this is a long duration. And even with the hopeful information we're getting, we still don't know when that end is really happening. So there's a real opportunity to, look out for those people. And I mean, going back to the PERMA model, that's a really like meaningful way to like find that happiness is like through that meaning. So thank you for that example. We can certainly talk too if like people have ideas outside of the slide deck. I don't want it to seem like it's my way or the highway.
Well, not to put Tammy on the spot, but you're so, you've got your 6 kids, you're a nurse, you're on the front lines. You said you're not lonely, but I know you're kind of, I just would love to know how you're engaging with, let's just say, I don't know if I should bring this, dating. I spoke with one woman and she said, I'm really having trouble dating. And I said, yeah, that's got to be really hard, especially when you're so busy, when everybody's so busy and we're all online. And then you have the etiquette part where I think Anne-Marie mentioned that too, which is sort of the, I don't know if you mentioned in the context of dating, Anne-Marie, but I'm just curious if there's any positive stories you want to share, since everything seems to be, you seem to be able to handle so much.
Thank you, Bambi, for putting me on the spot. So, actually, personally for me, I'm not thinking along the lines of dating. So I am recently divorced as of last year, October. And that was a journey in and of itself. I do have 4 teenage daughters though, and 2 of them are in college, and they're on the lines of thinking more of dating, but they get to have a lot of more peer interaction. So it's good for them. I did ask my children what they thought if mommy ever did date again, and their response was very positive. So, but I personally, I'm not interested. I'm so busy, Bambi. I'm also going back to school to get my doctorate. So I'm studying to be a doctor. I'm also a medical missionary. So I really don't have time. It would literally have to be like God shining a light on this human being and saying, this is the one, Tammy, pay attention. Or, I mean, honestly, I'm not looking at all. Too busy.
I'm amazed by all of the things you're tackling. Very impressive. And you must have passion for all of them, because it's hard to take on that much. But if you have passion, then it can be done, I imagine.
Yeah.
So I guess I don't know if I'm the only single person here. I can talk about a little bit. I think it does add an extra layer of complexity, because there is the natural question about, you know, how do you feel about the virus? I mean, what do you do to protect yourself? And you kind of want to make sure you're on relatively the same page. But interestingly, I think that there's a lot more depth to the interactions that I'm observing myself personally, and that my other single friends are observing, because I think the world's become a lot more serious, for one, and you really have to invest in a different way and at a different level if you want to try to date now. So I feel like there's more intention and there's more depth to dating interactions that I've seen in my circle. But certainly it takes more work to get to that first date than it used to. It used to be just kind of say hi and then meet for a coffee.
That's an interesting point you bring up, because it could be good in some ways, because you said, Anne-Marie, that this world is more serious. And so when you have that interaction, you're actually really getting to know that person. At the same time, you kind of need levity when you're meeting somebody, right? You just sort of, then if you bypass all of that and you bypass the fun and you just go right to the seriousness, you might, I don't know, it seems like it could work against you. But, we have Aowen. Hello, Aowen. You just came on. We were talking about dating, and we had a couple of single folks talk about their experience. Anne-Marie just brought up the fact that the world is more serious. So in some ways, I sort of commented on what she said, and I said, in some ways that might be good, because you really can get to the heart of things. You get to know the person. At the same time, you're missing kind of the funness of like meeting somebody in person and just knowing who they are for the fun parts of them. But I'm sure you have love to hear any story that you, can I mention that I've sort of seen a blossoming of a relationship with you, and I'm sort of watching it on air on Facebook.
I like calling it on air. That makes it sound a lot more important than it is.
TV.
Yeah, no, just a very sort of bare bones version. But yeah, I think that what you said is probably true, is that there's some benefit. You can get to know somebody on a more serious level. I also think that, like, and I can give maybe the sort of a short version of the story, but like, I do think that there's some things that the fun that you get from sort of meeting somebody in person and doing all these things for the first time together, like, can actually kind of, it can obscure some of the things that are maybe not working in the relationship, because there's all these other things that are distractors, right? And like, once you take away the distractors, you can't go to the movies together where you just sit for a few hours and watch a screen together, like that kind of stuff. You're left with either like the two of you work well together or you don't. And so I actually think there's maybe an upside to some of this. But basically, like, I met the person I'm dating, his name is Max, and I met him on like one of those apps. We messaged back and forth for like a week. He told me some stories about playing the trombone in middle school. It was the standard like fun fact stuff. We met on video chat. It was absolutely awkward, incredibly painfully awkward. And but we figured, give it another conversation, because it has to be awkward. Like, that's how this works. And we had, a few more. Than like, as like a couple weeks go in, both of us do something to rub the other person the wrong way. Both of us think like, I could just bail, like, I don't know this person that well. I could just kind of, disappear. And then neither of us did it. And both of us sort of said, hey, like, this, whatever, kind of didn't sit well with me. And I think that was like where trust was built. And so like this first experience of like, I can actually communicate this to another person, and they don't just immediately react, or get defensive. And so from there, the conversations got longer, sort of deeper, more intense. We would spend 4 or 5 hours just chatting on video chat several times a week. And it was weird. It was definitely weird. And we didn't have an in-person option because one of the people in his household was extremely fearful about the virus. And so like he was not able to leave the house and come back in. And so for, 4 or 5 months, it was just, because it was, we essentially met right when the shutdown happened. It was just this weird thing back and forth of the video chatting, but for hugely long periods of time. And so by the end of like 4 months, I knew more about this person who I had never met in person than I knew about people I had dated for over a year or potentially lived with, because there wasn't an occasion to ask a lot of these questions. Like if you have 5 hours to kill, nothing to do, then you start asking questions like, what would your reaction be if you had a kid with a profound disability? What are your thoughts on adoption? What would happen if, what are your feelings on like, if your parents' values don't line up with mine? Like how do we respond to that? And so you have this opportunity to ask these questions because there's nothing else to do that mean that you get to know the person on a much deeper level. And so he actually is now living with me because there wasn't another in-person option. We both agreed it was a terrible idea. I want to just put that out there right now. I do not think that you should move in with somebody after 4 to 5 months. I do not. But it was that or continue 100% Zoom, and that sucked too. So I think if I took one thing away from this to kind of wrap this up, it's that sort of what I started with, which is when you strip away a lot of the extra, and particularly like the physical intimacy drives a relationship, and you just take all of that out, you're left with kind of the infrastructure of the connection between you and the other person and the compatibility between you and the other person. And in this particular case, I found that it was probably the first time I've ever had like a physical experience with another person who I had already built a significant amount of trust with. And that was a bizarre experience, but a hugely positive experience as compared to like my normal association with like kind of the obligation of things moving in a physical direction faster than you want them to in normal relationships, because that's just kind of like the pressure that's there, So I have no idea if this will last. We'll find out. We may kill each other after a month living together. Very possible. I'm very particular, but who knows? But either way, I feel like I learned a tremendous amount, even if, it's not permanent, about kind of what matters. And that's it.
Thank you for sharing. That was very rich and detailed, and it really helped to understand your story. So thanks.
Oh, I'm glad.
No, thank you so much for sharing that. Especially, I do have to kind of mention, he probably knew you were particular before he moved in.
Oh yeah. And he knows that if he screws up, he sleeps outside. This is my apartment. Like, we have established boundaries.
So everybody went in eyes wide open, but that's awesome.
I have a couple of things to say. So I feel like we're back to the courtship. That's great. I love the idea of the courtship coming back during this pandemic. And then the other is just efficiency. I mean, talk about efficient. So when you were speaking, Ao, when I thought about how, this relationship, you could easily drop it, right? I mean, there's nothing, what's the right word? It's just so much easier online. You haven't built up anything. You're not even driving to dates or anything like that. It's just, there's nothing to lose, right? You could just shut off the relationship, shut off your computer, or you can escalate it the way you've done in 4 to 5 months, because you've gone so deep. And like you said, if you did this in person, you wouldn't know half of what you know now, because all that other stuff would be there. So there's a lot of efficiency in the relationship online.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah, so Tammy, you have teenagers right now who are going through dating, and by the way, when Anne-Marie said, God be with you, I mean, not only do you have 6 kids, you have teenagers. And, you know, having 3 of them, I know. Oh, you have 4 teenagers. Okay. And they're all girls, right? I wouldn't even know because I have boys, but I know the teenage years, and they're difficult ones. And Don, you know that too. So how, you said with the dating, they've been okay with it, or are they even interested? Are they
Oh
doing?
yeah, they're definitely interested, especially the ones that are in college. And it was really cute. So at the beginning of the year, Brianna's my oldest, she's 18. She calls me up and she's like, Mom, I'm meeting this guy for the first time. This is pre-COVID, so it was a little less, restrictive, but she was really excited and she was all nervous. It was just coffee, and it was in like the main college meeting area, but she was all nervous. And I'm like, oh, sweetie, it's just coffee. You're gonna be fine. You're gonna talk about normal things. And then she's like, Mom, you don't understand. She sends me a picture while we're like talking, and I see this picture and he's so cute. And I'm like, oh, I see why you're nervous. And she's like, Mom, that's not helpful. So it's just fun stuff. But so during the COVID though, they haven't been dating, but they've been meeting up with other groups of mixed, male and female groups, and just been hiking and just more exploring friendships right now, I think, which I think is really healthy anyway.
Yeah, I'm finding that in COVID, and I know we're going to talk more about this during parenting, but I'm finding that particularly teenagers, there's so much pent up, particularly with my boys. I mean, they're going through so much, right? They're already being responsible. Without COVID, they're already dealing with so many things, right? Because they're becoming adults. And now that we're taking away so much from them, I feel like, this dating stuff, it could be even more dangerous. Because, like, for instance, I think kids don't, we're all talking about our risk tolerance, and I think kids are, they're already feeling that they're invulnerable, right? And so then they go out, and we saw some kids sharing masks. We're like, that's not helping, right? Because they're like, oh, I forgot my mask, so here, oh, use mine when you go into the store. So they definitely don't use the mask. So you wonder, because they're so pent up, you wonder what they're going to be doing even when they're not with you and when they're dating. Because I know that my kids have, my boys have, there's girls around. So that's been something on my mind, like what is going on, because right now there's so much pent up demand and invulnerability that they already feel. That's just my issues with dating.
Can I share something about dating as a man who's been married for 25 years?
Yeah.
Believe it or not, I have a lot of friends who are guys and girls who are in their mid-20s. And just yesterday I had a conversation with one of them about dating. And I'm really grateful to hear what you had to say. Awen, is that right? About the depth of the conversations and the relationship. And Tammy, you chimed in on friendship as well as you, Bambi. I remember when I started dating my wife, it was really all about friendship. And we got a chance just to be friends. And, just to be totally transparent here, we didn't sleep together until we were married. But we just had no pressure of what the world said to us about what other friends and people said. We really just wanted to be best friends. And I think when you date, at least for me, it was, I want to date to have a relationship. And where that relationship goes, I don't know. But ultimately, I think we all want relationships that are going to last a long time. And I've been fortunate, a lot of hard work. But to hear, like yesterday's comment, the guy has a girlfriend who he started dating her just before COVID. And he said, I'm doing certain things in our relationship because I'm afraid she's going to dump me. I thought, oh, dude. That's not a good relationship. Dating's supposed to be, I think, Thomas, you shared a little earlier too about being vulnerable and humble to, share. And if someone doesn't like you because of what you post or who you are as a person, then it's okay to part company and go find someone else you can be better friends with. So I don't envy you who are single, because I know how hard it is to find a great friend. And then from that friendship to want more perhaps, or one person wants more, the other one doesn't, then it's a tough place. So I empathize with all of you, and I thank you so much for sharing your hearts and your stories. It's beautiful to hear. Thank you.
Don, I agree with the friendship aspect. I think that is really key for building a really good, solid relationship.
You know, it's interesting. I had a life coach once, and I still don't know a lot about life, but she came in at a super critical time for me. And she said something about connecting with people. And so let's just take dating, and let's like say dating is really part of our connection to the world, of which we want to get more connected or more intimate to, right? And a lot of times, she said, is that you think you're getting attracted to somebody based on what you're saying to them or what you're doing, but effectively it's really about how you feel about yourself or your subconscious value system. And I think if we relate it back to the time, there's been so many good stories that have been shared here. You know, we're really connecting to ourselves and what's important. And I think prior to COVID, we were running so fast and so hard against things. You kind of ask yourself, what did I do today? Like, where was it? I think there's an intentionality to who we are and our relationship to ourselves that now kind of is coming first, and who we've chosen to kind of like surround with during this time. And I think now as we venture back out, we're going back out as fuller human beings, more connected to who we really are, you know, rectifying a number of things that have been, I'd just say personally stuck, like I've been stuck on, or willing to not address or to come back with. And I think that begets something to Bambi's video, just about the opportunity that we really are, that we have here, is just to build this resiliency and this return to, I think, some fundamental understanding of who we are. And I think it's just net positive for our whole life. And I think it's absolutely net positive for our dating life as we look forward. So thanks for letting me share that.
I think that's great. I think about the conversation we had about social media and the emoticons and just the gratuitous, you know, liking, or just the shallowness of the connections that we have online versus versus the AON situation where we find a relationship and we go deep really fast. And so in some ways, you're right, Tom, there is a net positive, because maybe there is a superficial stuff, but overall, and I hope this is the case, because we are going to be online quite a bit, at least for the foreseeable future. Overall, I do feel that when you hear a story like Eowyn, where it's, you know, you just cut through the muck and you get to the points, and it sounds terrible. It's like it sounds like you're interviewing somebody, like, you know, okay, do you like this, do you meet all my criteria? And you don't have the fun, but maybe that's good, right? And you're not doing that, Eowyn, because it sounds like you were having conversations for 5 hours or several hours a day and getting deep conversations.
We sprinkled some fun in there. There was.
How do you, okay, did you just, we had crack open a bottle of beer and have beers together, or what?
No, so he doesn't drink at all, which I don't understand. But he, so no. And we have a bit of an age difference. So part of it was that I felt like he had a significant amount of movie education or re-education that he needed on things that he hadn't seen. So we watched some of those together, critical movies like Talladega Nights.
Online? Like online?
Yeah.
On Zoom? Oh, do you watch
on Zoom, it would lag on his end or lag on my end. So you got like 50% of the movie. But if you picked one with a lot of quotable moments, that was okay. And where you don't really need to understand the plot to enjoy the movie. That was key. So we did that. We did a lot of Zoom game nights. So like my family plays Codenames, if any of you have played it over Zoom. And we play Monopoly. I hate Monopoly. It's like real life where you have to pay bills, except they make you do it for a game. And I don't like taking people's money, so I do very poorly. But we did that, and so he would play with my family, and we'd just all be on screens but playing the game. Yeah, it would also be like, be sharing things that whatever during the day that was funny. This happened to me, or I'm still working, and so there's stuff from my work with kids, and kids are ridiculous. Or just I watched this video today, it was funny. I read this article. So it was like, some of it was like getting to know the other person in terms, interview style of like, well, what do you think about this? But usually it was pretty organic. And it just came up in a sort of natural sequence that things would come up in, like talking about my work with kids. Eventually we were talking about sort of like his experience working with kids. And then that goes into like, by the way, like, do you want any kids? And then talking about like, for me, I don't want biological kids because of a mental health condition that I have that I don't want to pass. And so like, I want adoptive kids. So then it's like, how do you feel about adoption? So it had a progression that would start with shooting the breeze, for lack of a better phrase, about whatever. And then just sort of as things come up, being like, oh, I don't actually know your perspective on this. Do you mind sharing it? So it didn't end up feeling as like stilted as I guess it could have.
Another question for you, sorry, but I recall during dating times where you don't have to say anything and you could just be with someone and, like you're walking, right? So it's hard to just have a constant conversation. What did you do for those times you want to be with them and you just don't want to talk? Don't sit there and stare at their face.
It's more awkward on video chat, I'm not gonna lie. There's not a lot of just like being in each other's space in that way. But I think that like, I think this would depend on your personality type. Like, I think if you're more naturally introverted, or if you're not, I don't have a problem filling any number of hours of talking. That has never been a weakness for me. In fact, I probably should talk less. There's like the scene in Shrek where Donkey's talking and then, Shrek is like getting him to shut up is the trick. And then he is equally chatty. So that wasn't a problem for us. I would imagine if you were a more naturally introverted person, that would be more challenging. And I think in that case, then like, you just wouldn't Zoom for as long, like you would break it up. You would do things more like we did some sharing of like, this is something that I read that I thought was really interesting. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. So like, some of it might be that you read something that the other person recommends and then you come back and talk about it. Like, I think that that's more based on your personality type. And just for us, we're both pretty extroverted.
Did you say sharing books, you were saying?
Yeah, sure. Sharing an article, sharing a book, saying, I saw this thing on the news. What do you think of this? Because that means that some of the time you're going to actually spend like looking at whatever they sent you. And then some of the time talking about it instead of like, sitting and having to talk for, you don't need to do 4 to 5 hours at a time, I guess is what I'm saying. You can find other things to do.
I think that's great, having shared reading material. I know when I was dating and I had a book, I decided to buy a book for my now husband. I bought a book and on the same day he bought a book and we exchanged books. We're like, whoa, wait a second. So we just thought, okay, maybe there is something there. And they were books that we both really liked too. They're very similar books, but it was on the same day. And I think that was a way to, for us to get to know each other as well, is just through the books that we were reading. And that's helpful now with Zoom calls, right? That seems like something you can apply here. There's somebody else on the Lipping. I know that you're visible. Did you want to share something? You don't have to. I don't want to put you on the spot.
Hi. Hi everyone. My name is Lipping. I'm sorry I'm late. I was having trouble finding the link. I honestly don't have anything to share at this moment. I'm just like glad to be in a group, that's made a significant difference. Nowadays, other than my husband and the kids, and I don't hang out with anyone else. So I'm just happy to be here.
No, we're so glad you're here. One of the things that when Aowen was talking, it made me think of how many parallels it is with long distance dating, and maybe like a way that we can kind of normalize that, because sometimes when we approach things as a brand new thing, it can feel really overwhelming. But I have like someone close to me who was in a very long distance relationship, and they would even eat dinner together. And so there were those like moments of quiet while they were chewing or eating. And just like now I'm married, we have a small child, so dinners are not usually quiet, but they used to be, where it wasn't always like we needed to talk, where sometimes we did, but there is that comfortable silence after a while. And I think that can also grow over time. And certainly I can appreciate, just like a long distance relationship, it's kind of, I mean, if we're going to do this, if we're going to Zoom for hours at a time, we're both committed, and we're both like admitting that commitment in a way that there's not room for the games necessarily that might present with, oh, I'll wait this long to text, or I won't respond immediately. It's like, no, like this is how I show that I'm engaged, is through that response. So, and it's congratulations. That sounds awesome. And I can definitely see how that could be replicated for other people as well.
So before we got married, my husband and I, we were long distance for 2 years. And I was in Beijing, and he was in LA. So we're basically just long distance. And back then there was no Zoom, but there was Skype. So we would open the Skype and do parallel hangout, like whoever does its day and just do the day. And then sometimes we're just like, oh, he just passing by in the background. Yeah, and then he was just like, sometimes he fell asleep and with the Skype on, and like I could hear him snoring on the other end. Yeah, so it was tough, but now I think back and then I really appreciate like the honest. So that's the good way, like we're completely honest with each other. So that laid the foundation of our friendship. And nowadays, like even we're doing parallel hangout, and like he works a lot and works a lot, and we always know that okay, we were in a long distance in the worst scenario for a very long time, and we still find a sweetness in there. So and then we always like saying, hey, we can do this and pass forward. And I think that was the only thing we learned from the past. Yeah.
That's an important thing, especially if you can kind of come back to that, like the point of why you're together. I think that's wonderful, because so much changes over time, right? Like we change, like I'm certainly very different than I was even 10 years ago. I will be different in 10 years time. And so if we can come back to like, this is the connection that brought us together, I think that's really, really important and critical. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
We have about 5 minutes, and we were going to have Hillary, who is going to be the therapist. We're going to have to say goodbye to Alyssa, but Hillary is going to be joining us on September for parenting. And then we have in October, we have work-life balance. And then in November, it's purpose. So yeah, so October it's work-life balance. In November, it is purpose. So we have 5 minutes, and I thought maybe what would be nice is to go around and have everyone share maybe something that they've learned and taken away. And I can start. I think a lot of you have shared some great things, and starting with Tom, talking about things are going so fast now, but we're creating richer relationships. And I think AON is a testament to having richer relationships. And so this is a net positive for all of us being online. But we have to be cognizant of defining our self-worth. And I think Tammy brought that up, and defining our self-worth on these emoticons and how many likes we're getting. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. And then Don, you talked about, that verse that you talked about with live at peace with everyone. And if we can just think about that first before, and I'll bring back the quote I raised earlier, which is from that movie, Let There Be Dragons. Before you rush to act, before you try to change the world, first think about changing yourself. So I always think about that. And one thing on what you mentioned, Alyssa, which is the PERMA. So positive emotion, engagement, relationships. What was M? Meaning and accomplishment. So one of the things we were doing in our house, we don't do it anymore now that we're opening up. And when we were in full lockdown, and there's 8 people in this house, my 4 sons, my husband, myself, my mom, and my dad. And so for about 2 months, we were having dinner every night around 6:30, 5 o'clock, and we practiced PERMA in this way. We always were grateful for one thing, and we always had to say what we were grateful for and what we accomplished in that day. And so I have this gratitude book, and so I kept it. I mean, some things were silly, like, you know, I played Fortnite. I'm like, that's not an accomplishment. But, you know, with 4 boys, you just, it was really funny. And I thought we would get a good laugh, at least, like looking back and seeing what everybody accomplished and what everybody, everyone was grateful for. So that's my, so I'll pass it along to whoever else wants to share. Wrap up. News?
Hi there, it's Gail. I haven't spoken yet, so I guess I have to do that. I'll also try to turn my video on. I don't know if you can see. Thank you so much again, Bambi. This is just a wonderful session, and thank you, Alyssa, and everyone else. Pleasure to meet you all. This has been serendipity. I didn't. So for me, I have been sequestered for almost 7.5 months because my last travel date was February, and I was actually in the Shenzhen airport in Frankfurt. So I already saw the writing on the wall, and it was very scary because of my background. I'm actually an infectious disease epidemiologist by training, so before I went into business. So for me, what I have learned from this conversation, which has been really clarifying, is allowing yourself the grace and the time to complexity of the emotions. And then also giving yourself permission to do a reset, to recalibrate the relationships you have and the relationships you need to take more time to nurture. So for me, I found myself, because I actually intended and forced myself to be sheltered in place, the first 6 weeks, I sort of went dark. I stopped skating online. I just needed the quiet time to really get a grip about, so how we want to see ourselves in the world, and how do we want to present ourselves in the world, and how do we want to spend the time, and with whom do we want to spend the time with. So that's, this conversation has been very clarifying. Thank you.
Thanks, Gail. I wish you jumped in earlier. It would have been nice to hear more from you.
Oh, I need a lot of time to process.
Well, quickly, Gail, so in March when this happened, when things started shutting down, I got really sort of somewhat, I wouldn't say depressed, but I was pretty bummed out. So I actually, I write a lot. And so I feel, what I did was I wrote this essay, and it was in normal times we suffer alone. In ordinary times we suffer alone. That actually kind of made me feel better. I know that sounds strange, feeling like you're okay because everybody's suffering, but it did put a lot of things into perspective for me when so many things were lost and taken away. Don, do you have some words? You always have something to share.
I've told you the first time we spoke on this, I'm a better listener than speaker, so I appreciate that. But I'm very grateful for everybody being on here. It's wonderful to see each person who's, we got our own DNA, we're unique in our own way. And I just love the fact that what you've put together, Bambi, here is an opportunity to embrace one another, the differences. We don't have to agree, going back to PERMA, right? Or one of your slides there, Allison. It was really great to be able to hear different perspectives, to continually be encouraging to one another, live at peace with one another, and look forward to the next time, perhaps meeting some of you again, and maybe one day even in person, who knows? So thanks for doing this, Bambi. Thank you, Allison, for being here.
Tom, do you want to have any wrap up thoughts?
Yeah, no, I just briefly, you know, back to frameworks, that always helps me navigate life because my brain tends to work better. Back to dating or connecting with anybody, right? There are 4 things that matter, right? Some attraction is something that tells you can you even get close to each other. The second is communication, which is can we, even if we don't talk, still communicate? That tells you how happy you're going to be. There's this middle one, this third one, which is value systems, alignment. And that tells you how long the relationship's going to last, roughly, because if something important to you, does it connect? And I think what I loved about Eowyn's conversation and some of the other things that we've talked about, we're being more really who we really are, and our value systems are coming out first, and we're clear about what those are, and we should own them. And it's okay not to be liked if we don't, you know, misalign. I think our lives will be richer if we are who we are and are respected and loved and connected to the people that make sense. So I think we just have this great opportunity to let our value system shine. And the last thing I'll just add, and we didn't have a lot of time for that, but is, are we open-minded to growth? Like, are we so rigid that we can't adapt? And that tells you how it's going to evolve from the spot that it's at. So we're in a great spot. I really, really appreciate being invited to spend some time with you guys today.
That's a really great question, Tom. But how do we grow? We didn't really touch on that. How do we grow? Maybe that's something we have to table.
That's season 6 of Becoming Us. That Netflix is going to pick that up, I think.
Yes. Who are we going to be in 2021? So Eowyn, I'm going to jump to you because he mentioned you. So I'm going to go over to you.
I don't have a ton more to add than what I've said, although when I was thinking about listening, Tom, to what you just said, I think that, like, I agree with all of those things. And the one thing that I would, like, I guess, add is this idea of, like, safety with another person. I think that, like, so much in relationship with other people comes from, like, just a profound lack of, like, trust that the safety will be there, like emotional safety with another person. And so I think that, like, if nothing else from this experience where everybody is, I mean, most people, I guess, are not their best selves right now. You know, like, there are a few people who are, like, powering through this and they're doing some serious growth, and my hat off to them, but, like, not me. And the rest of us are, like, we're wrestling with demons. And I think that, like, in sharing those with another person, the biggest thing that gets in the way is fear, right? Is what is their response going to be? And if you can develop a sense of safety with another person, which I think goes along with values being aligned, then there isn't as much to fear with being open and honest about the things that you face. And then those things feel a little more faceable, I think. And so I've just been reflecting on that and reflecting on, like, how important, and not just in romantic relationships, in any relationship, in any friendship, in a relationship with your family, this sort of concept of, like, you know, what level of safety can I expect from this other person? And when that's high, it takes a lot of the stress out of things that would otherwise be very stressful, you know, especially now when we're all really stressed.
You can probably get to that safety faster, more efficient, right? You're asking the tough questions. But I do want to say something about the wrestling with demons. I think everybody's wrestling with their own demons. And I had to share this with my son, who was wrestling with different demons, his own demons. And I said, you know, sometimes we just have to sit in that space. And we're not, you know, nobody can get us out of it, but sometimes we learn a lot in that dark space. I hate to sound so negative, but, you know, I've sat in that space. And I think that if I don't learn anything if I just ignore it. Just kind of right above that space. It's like, oh gosh, I got to sit in that space. Okay, I'm here. Sit in that space and get through it. So, I see Tammy and Anne Marie and Michael. And does anybody else want to share some thoughts before I ask Alyssa to share her final thoughts?
Well, I'm actually at Lake Tahoe, so I don't know if you guys can hear me really clear because it might lose reception. But I just appreciate everyone just putting in their thoughts, and I really appreciate just, you know, connecting with each other in an honest and open and transparent environment where people are respected and their voice is heard. And so I just appreciate this platform that you guys have put together. Bambi, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. That's nice. Liping, did you want to say anything else or add one last thought? And then Alyssa? Anyone?
I think I'm good. Thank you for reading, everybody, and I hope to see you more in the future. I'll try my best to sit through all sessions.
So, Alyssa, you want to have your final thoughts?
Absolutely. First, I just want to thank all of you again for coming and being so engaging. It makes it a lot of fun for me because I've seen the slides. I know that information. So hearing, again, just those different perspectives, it really challenges me to kind of flesh out my thoughts, just as I think it sounds like it did for everyone else. And yeah, I also personally, thank you for everyone just being so encouraging. And I mean, it certainly has helped me foster a more positive attitude within myself, going forward. And that's something I think I was doing a good job about, but being surrounded by people that are really working towards having a more positive relationship, both with other people, with the greater community, is always a much richer place to be. So thank you so much. Thank you to Bambi. I know Hillary will be great. Yeah, I will certainly see you in some groups as a participant. So thanks again.
Well, Alyssa is, again, she's with BetterHelp. So everyone here gets a free trial with BetterHelp. So go ahead. We'll be sending out an email to everyone with a link to a video of this conversation, as well as a podcast if you prefer a podcast. We're also going to write up some stories to those who agreed and said that it's okay for us to write up some of those stories. They're really helpful for a lot of people who read them. But I think hopefully it's just by articulating your emotions that this has been helpful for you guys as well. It's definitely helpful for me. So I'm going to let you guys go. We're going to be back next month. Parenting, I don't know how many people want to join for parenting, but in October it's work-life balance, and then November it's purpose. And this is every other Thursday from 11 to 12:30, same Zoom number. So hopefully we will see you all again. So have a great day, guys. Thank you all for sharing.
Thanks.